Hey everyone, I just played The Witness, and I have no one to blame but myself. I knew going into the game I probably wasn't going to enjoy it, and I didn't. You know that meme of the guy sticking a rod through the spokes of his bike? That's me right now. So, why even play it at all? Well, let me explain. In my last video I had a look at Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, mostly just to shove something out while I work on other bigger projects. The video got a couple of comments agreeing with me, which is always nice, but what I found more interesting were the comments from people who didn't. To paraphrase, they said it was pretentious trash and a waste of time, and I don't even really disagree with that. I just enjoy the game in spite of those things. But it did get me thinking, what's a game lauded by many as a masterpiece that just comes off as the most up its own backside pretentious garbage to me? Hence why I finally returned to finish The Witness. It's a puzzle game that was released in 2016 by Feckler Inc., but is more commonly associated with its indie game auteur director Jonathan Blow. In it, you're dropped onto a luscious, colourful island to explore, with hundreds of puzzles to solve, and a few secrets to find. It's a simple setup, and it's easy to see why so many people love it. One of my friends actually thinks it's one of the best games ever made. It's the kind of thing I'd normally love too, but this is just too much. I couldn't stand my time with The Witness. So let's talk about why. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, there's going to be spoilers. Yes, really. So this is your only warning. Also, if you love The Witness, that's fine. I'm not here to take that away from you or convince you otherwise, even if I say some things you're really not going to agree with. I just hope by the end of the video you understand why I couldn't get into the game. Let's get to it. So, why did I play The Witness knowing that I probably wasn't going to enjoy it? To some extent, it was definitely putting the cart before the horse when it came to the thesis of this video, but it was also to give The Witness the benefit of the doubt to prove me wrong. I don't go into games wanting to hate them. Even titles I know going in probably aren't for me. I'm always willing to give media a chance to win me over. I'm always happy for something to defy my expectations and surprise me, and that's how I approached my playthrough of The Witness. I didn't go into it blind. I'd played it before for around 90 minutes or so, and I'd watched Joseph Anderson's review of the game years earlier, so I knew most of its back-end secrets. I want to briefly talk about that video a little later in this video, but for those watching who might be thinking I didn't get the real Witness experience as a result of watching Anderson's review, and that's why I didn't enjoy it, I never would have bought the game at all without that critique. Despite my earlier spoiler warning, sometimes knowing everything about a piece of media ahead of time can help sell it better than all the marketing in the world. I never would have watched The Boys without knowing stuff about the season 2 finale. I never would have read The Laundry Files without knowing a twist from the third book. I never would have played The Witness if not for Joseph Anderson. His video actually articulates a lot of my own thoughts about The Witness pretty well, and I've done my best not to just regurgitate his points in my own words without adding anything to the conversation. So if this review seems a little all over the place, that's why. Either way, I hadn't watched it in years when I sat down to play the game for this video, so the run was about as blind as it was possible to be. All I really remembered was a sense of frustration with the game from my earlier abandoned playthrough. This time I smashed through the game over the course of a week. I finished everything I cared to in about 14.5 hours, and when I was booted back to desktop at the end of it all, not only had I confirmed, with certainty, that The Witness is not a game for me, I was offended by how little respect it had for me as a player. Credit where it's due though, The Witness is beautiful. The art design is so warm and peaceful, and it's able to balance simple shapes with complex detail really well. The island might be abandoned, but there's nothing hostile about its emptiness visually, even in its more run-down areas. It's very colourful too, and each section of the island comes with its own unique array of tones. The autumn warmth of the woods feels different from the golden heat of the desert and the baking rust of the shipwreck. The stark greens of the bamboo jungle are very different from the brown trunks and shaded canopy of the tree houses, or the bubbling muck of the swamp. Even the mountain comes with its own unique colour palette, both within and without. Everywhere you stand, from whatever angle you look at it, the game is gorgeous. The world invites close inspection and rewards those willing to look with a bunch of fun optical illusions. All the moving parts and working machinery might move at a snail's pace, and I'll get to that later, but that doesn't make it unsatisfying. It's fun to watch the lasers activate and turn to face the mountain, or these boxes unfurl open when you finally reach them. I especially loved the little hints of previous habitation, the stacked pillows and blankets and glasses with this symbol. It gives the whole place a feel of a resort, a theme park, that you just happen to be wandering around during the off-season. And that's all before you get into the puzzles, which are visually simple, but no less pleasing to the eye. They're very easy to read mechanically. No two variations on the line puzzle theme are easily mistaken for one another, and that's great. For a game made with the intent to include as little tutorialization as possible, the visual design of the puzzles is almost perfect. It's clear a lot of time and effort went into building the game. I myself didn't even notice the fact that there are no circles outside of the puzzles anywhere in The Witness until Jonathan Blow said it in a video he did with Giant Bomb. Personally, my biggest problem with the visuals are the technical issues. There is some serious pop-in and slowdown when moving quickly between areas. The pop-in is especially obvious when riding the boat at top speed. The slowdown happened whenever I crossed the island on foot. Some of that is probably due to recording the game at the same time, but I distinctly remember it happening during my earlier attempts to play The Witness 2, on different computers even. It completely shatters the peaceful atmosphere the game is aiming for, and takes me right out of the experience. In terms of audio, I'm a little more torn. The Witness is a quiet game for the most part. There's usually a little bit of ambient noise, some gentle wind, the crunch of your feet on the ground, but it's rarely prominent, and that's by design. One style of puzzle is based entirely on sound, so those mechanical effects by necessity must be made to stand out in the mix compared to the general ambience, and they do. Everything is so still most of the time that the second any kind of noise breaks the silence, it instantly tells you it's puzzle related. Or at least it did for me, even here in the shipwreck. The sound effects are all crisp and clean. None of them struck me as out of place or poorly recorded. The little hums and thrums and pops and clicks of the puzzles mixed really well with their visual design. The stronger roars and bangs of the hidden environmental puzzles were even better. Something big and bombastic to match the achievement of finding them at all. The mechanical whirs of the laser boxes could have been made a bit more weighty given their significance. If they're going to be so slow in moving, they might as well sound as though they're heavy. The voice acting is also stellar, if you can find it. There are audio logs hidden all over the island, many of which are quotes about the game's main themes from famous historical figures, and they're acted well enough.
You wake up usually in the mornings, and just the way that the track of your orbits go, you wake up over the Mideast, over North Africa.
But if you're actually able to track down the handful containing dialogue, you will find some amazing performances. I was impressed by how well the voice cast is able to convey subtle things like doubt and wariness and complicated personal relationships without any sort of visual cues or contextual lore.
What?
I'm going to the store. Do you want a sandwich or something?
You've been standing there for like an hour.
I didn't want to interrupt.
And I don't like sandwiches. Have you ever seen me with a sandwich? Why would you think I want a sandwich?
Sorry.
No, I need some sleep.
It's okay.
It's such a contrast to the upbeat, straight deliveries of the quotes, and it sucks that they're so well hidden because they deserve to be heard. There's not as much music, but as with the puzzle-specific sound effects, when it does show up, you know it's an event. Believe me when I say I never want to hear In the Hall of the Mountain King again, not because The Witness uses it to score its most challenging run of puzzles, but because it was featured in the 2017 cinematic trainwreck The Snowman, and that movie fried my brain.
Let's find out. Someone at work got me the tickets.
What the fuck? Anyway, I understand the game being so quiet isn't just to make the audio puzzles or moments of voiceover pop, it's also meant to be relaxing, and that's where I find myself torn on it. I just don't find that kind of silence peaceful. As someone who suffers from tinnitus, I find it distracting. It takes me out of the experience, but I also can't think of a way to reconcile that with its functionality elsewhere in the game. I also can't reconcile the game's lack of accessibility options. Call me a line puzzle because my segues are simple. simple. If you're deaf or hard of hearing, you can't switch on subtitles to help with the sound-based puzzles, and if you're colorblind, there's no way to make the colors any easier to read. You don't have to complete those specific puzzles to finish the game, but in that Giant Bomb video I mentioned before, Jonathan Blow just says if you want to 100% The Witness and are deaf or colorblind, you'll just have to look up a guide, which I think is crap. I understand not wanting to compromise, and to show just how subjective this sort of thing is, one of the people Blow is playing the game with in that video actually is colorblind and found the color puzzles more engaging as a result, but on the whole, I think it's better to have accessibility options than not. Far be it from me to cast the first stone regarding that sort of thing though, since I've only just now started working on official subtitles for all the videos on this channel. As for gameplay, it's divided between line puzzles and exploration. When it comes to the former, the game packs a surprising amount of diversity and complexity into drawing a line across a screen, and does so without beating the player over the head with the mechanics through tutorials. The first puzzle in any given area is usually so simple and self-explanatory that once the rule clicks, you'll never need it explained again. Sort the colours, make the shapes, cover the dots, so on and so forth. It's all good stuff. There are some mechanics that the game never properly explains, or if it does, I never found where, and I'm pretty certain that's true for everyone, just on different things. It took me until the very end of the game to understand what the hell the triangles did, and I'm still not entirely sure what the blue dots in the marsh mean. I think you're meant to subtract a square from the yellow shapes when drawing the line, but sometimes it didn't really feel that way. I've heard a lot of people find the sound-based puzzles to be a major difficulty spike, but for whatever reason I didn't have any trouble with them. In fact, I completed them while listening to an audio log at the same time because I was too impatient to wait for it to end.
That you're the sensing element for man. You look down and see the surface of that globe that you've lived on all this time, and you know all those people down there.
I knew about them ahead of time, but I didn't know the trick to solving them. It just clicked. It was the same with the screen puzzles that use environmental hints like shadows and background elements. One of the things I love doing when watching movies is looking out for weird shit or mistakes in the corner of shots. Like this hand throwing some birds in Congo, or this guy standing behind the power loader in Aliens, or, to pick another movie completely at random, the puppeteers operating a velociraptor in this reflection at the very end of Jurassic Park. I go out of my way to look for that kind of stuff, so when I started seeing the same sort of thing in The Witness, I just got it, though I completely understand why others might not. I was often more blind to the elements within the puzzles themselves. There was usually a dot or a coloured square I'd miss on my first attempt, and if I couldn't get it on the first handful of tries, that generally meant I'd be there for 10 to 15 minutes. It was almost like getting into a flow state. My biggest complaint about them is that there are way too many, which is also why I don't think the puzzles fit very well into the huge open world you're given to explore. The island is beautiful, but if you're only here for the puzzles, all it does is get in the way. You can't do anything but walk, run, and draw lines. There's no jump, and every ledge is walled off by an invisible barrier. And while that makes sense for some areas to prevent sequence breaking, it fucking sucks for moments where you just want to hop up a small ledge, or drop down to a lower platform in the same run of puzzles. It's even worse if you're in a section of the island where the puzzle screens shut down if you fail them. I fucking hated this mechanic. It is such a waste of time in a game that is already extremely drawn out. Not only does it force you to move around and repeat puzzles you've already solved, but it's applied arbitrarily. Some areas of the island have it, others don't, and the ones that don't only serve to prove how unnecessary a hoop it is to jump through in the ones that do. Nothing is gained by forcing you back a step to repeat a previous puzzle, especially when the solution remains highlighted on the screen. The only area in the game I felt it was justified was the timed challenge gauntlet in the caves under the mountain, because there it actually serves a mechanical purpose. The rest of the time, it just serves to interrupt the flow of puzzles. The island is surprisingly hard to get around in its denser areas too. I wasn't tripped up by the sound-based puzzles, but I did actually get stuck in the jungle for a bit because I couldn't find the fucking starting screen in amongst the maze of green. To be fair, I actually did enjoy exploring the island quite a bit, but that enjoyment was completely disconnected from my ravenous need to bulldoze through the line puzzles. I liked looking through new areas, taking in all the details, figuring out how everything was connected spatially to all the other parts of the island, hunting for out-of-the-way areas and secrets. Not that there really were any. The reward for exploration is never anything but another line puzzle. None of the secrets there are to find can be interacted with or picked up or used for anything mechanically. There are very few shortcuts to open until the end of the game. Even the videos you can watch beneath the windmill are activated with and contain extra hidden line puzzles. It's line puzzles all the way down, from the very first moments of the game. And I'm not talking about the line you draw to open the door, I'm talking about the line you walk along the floor to reach it. Joseph Anderson makes an interesting point about how the game doesn't let you turn around or go backwards in this opening moment, and that's why. It would ruin the act of walking the first hidden environmental puzzle, but it's also something the player will have no idea is there on a blind first run. So the game essentially has to hold you hostage until you reach the end of the hallway to make sure that artistic vision is maintained. This isn't the only time The Witness does this sort of thing either, and I'll get into that a bit later, but it is the only time it happened in general gameplay. The rest of the environmental puzzles hidden around the island I really enjoyed. I didn't find them all, I didn't even complete all the ones I found, but I never got tired of looking at part of the world and thinking, huh, that kind of looks like a hidden puzzle, and it was, every single time. The big sweep of colours to the nearest black pillar was very satisfying to see too. Using the island to find the right angle and position at which to complete these hidden puzzles was the most engaging aspect of the game for me. Along with the final areas like the mountain and the caves, the hidden lines were the only part of The Witness that successfully blended the puzzles and the environment in my opinion. But it's not enough to carry a 14-hour playthrough. No part of The Witness is. That's really my biggest criticism of the gameplay. The puzzles and the exploration of the island are fine when taken on their own, but when thrown together they just get in each other's way. The amount of puzzles is impressive, but quantity does not equal quality, especially when they're spaced out over such great distances. Especially when you have to repeat so many either because there are dozens of the same one or the panels shut down on you if you fail, especially when so few of them actually make good use of the massive open world. There's a nice variety of mechanics, but at the end of the day, you're still just drawing a line on a screen over and over and over again. The store pages claim that, quote, there's no filler, each of those puzzles brings its own new idea into the mix, end quote, just isn't reflected in gameplay, even if you completely discount everything but those line puzzles. As for the island, it's lovely to explore, but its size just isn't justified due to the rigid way the game forces you to travel between areas. The invisible walls on short drops, the lack of any kind of fast travel system beyond the boat, the abysmal slowness with which platforms and elevators move. Getting stuck on a puzzle for hours or days can certainly become frustrating, but at least you know there is a solution, opaque as it may be. None of the above examples are in any way related to player skill, they just slow you down, and that is far more frustrating than any puzzle I ever got hung up on. And that frustration also looped back into my experience with the puzzles. As the game went on and I explored every part of the island, travelling between each of its areas just became busy work. I'd arrive at an unfinished section already annoyed by the roundabout route I had to take to get to it, and then grow even more frustrated by the mechanical monotony of the puzzles, regardless of whether I got stuck or blazed through them. Either way, I found it tedious, and that feeling only grew the longer the game went on. The puzzles and exploration for their own sake weren't enough to keep me invested. The addition of extra mechanics wasn't enough to keep the puzzles fresh. The beauty of the island only faded over time. I just wanted to be done. I couldn't even checklist my way through it because there are no lists to check. There's no way to easily read through your progress and see what you're missing. You have to mosey on over to the lake and take a squiz at these leaves and lanterns and sprinklers. This is a fun way to record the player's progress. I love it on paper, but it's in such an out-of-the-way place, and and it doesn't come with any kind of legend to explain what each of its elements represent, and it's just so poorly communicated overall to the player that it's not fit for purpose. The game does such a good job of explaining its puzzle mechanics without relying on heavy tutorialization that the lack of any sort of explanation here at the lake stands out. I don't know how you're meant to understand what the lake is trying to tell you without coming back to it every now and then. And if you're not looking for changes, would you even notice they happened? Contrast it with the black pillars representing your progress through the environmental puzzles. There's a big sweep of light and sound whenever you solve one, and one of the patterns on the pillar itself lights up. It's obvious what they're trying to tell you. It's a nice idea, but it's poorly implemented. It's easy and often tempting to fall back on the criticism of, I don't like this, therefore it's bad, but that's the thing, I don't actually dislike any aspect of The Witness in isolation. It's just the way they're combined that turned the game into an absolute chore for me. If not for the fact I was making this video, I would have dropped it a couple of hours in. I'm almost glad I didn't though, because the game improves dramatically toward the end once you reach the mountain area, or if you go out of your way to unlock the secret section in the caves. Not only do they make much better use of their surrounding environments, you can open up a bunch of shortcuts to all over the island in the process. The timed challenge set to music in the caves was probably the best part of the game, because even though it drove me up the fucking wall for a couple of hours, at least I wasn't bored. It's just too little too late. It finally felt like the puzzles and the environments were coming together in a new and interesting way, that the game was finally building to something, and then it's just over. I would have much preferred these areas somewhere earlier in the game, the midpoints, or maybe even just after the start. So many of the trash filler puzzles in the marsh or the treehouse could have been cut down. So many underutilized mechanics like the sound-based shapes could have been removed, and all those resources could have been funneled into building more areas like the endgame gauntlets. The game teases you with a glimpse at a better version of itself. You get to witness what the Witness might have been, and then just when it's getting good, you're thrown into the Great Glass Elevator to go fight a Vermicious Knid or some shit. There wasn't even really any story for me to engage with. As I said before, the vast majority of the audio logs in the game are just quotes from historical figures. Very few of them actually create any sort of narrative. There is an explanation for what's going on, and even a live-action cinematic to play the game out if you find the secret ending. But those do not make a complete story. To summarize, you're a developer beta testing the island using some kind of dream-compatible VR technology to run the simulation. Basically, you were in a coma the whole time. On a completely unrelated note, the whole story turning out to be a dream or a simulation has to be one of my least favourite twists in all of fiction. I can count the number of stories that have done it well on one hand, and this is going to shock you, but The Witness is not among them. I know, unexpected, right? Hang on, was that a jar of piss? Oh, I understand the game now! So needless to say, I did not enjoy my time with The Witness. I spent most of the game bored or frustrated or both. I lost count of the times I just said fuck it and went reaching for a guide because I simply was not invested in the game. I get why some people love it, but it's just not for me. If it was something smaller, if it were entirely line puzzles, or if it were entirely an island to explore, if there was some kind of reward or mechanical variety, if there was more plot to tie it all together, I think I'd probably enjoy it a lot more than I did. In fact, I don't just think I'd enjoy it more, I know I would. This is The Looker. It's a puzzle game released for free in 2022 by Subcreation Studio, but is really the work of one-man indie dev Bradley Lavelle. In it, you're dropped onto a luscious, colourful island to explore, with a bunch of puzzles to solve, and a few secrets to find. It is also a parody of The Witness, and I loved it. I'm not alone either. At the time of writing, The Witness has 13,580 reviews on Steam, 85% of which are positive. The Looker has 13,186 reviews on Steam, of which 97% are positive. That is wild to me. That's a difference of only 394 reviews, but by percentage, the gap is large enough to bump The Looker into overwhelmingly positive, while The Witness remains one bracket below in very positive. Of course, this doesn't take into account The Witness's reviews on other platforms, or the thoughts of everyone who's ever played it, but I still think it's telling that The Looker has a more positive reception, at least on Steam. Overall, there isn't that much of a difference between them. The Looker is a much smaller, rougher experience, and has you solving mazes rather than drawing lines, but otherwise mechanically they're very similar. What really separates them is tone. The Looker has a very tongue-in-cheek, self-aware sense of humour. It's not afraid to laugh at itself, or The Witness. A somber audio log about the nature of life will suddenly turn into a commercial for used cars.
Through many births, I have wandered on and on, searching for, but never finding, a better deal than 0% APR on certified pre-owned vehicles.
A maze with sound cues will heckle you for not solving it fast enough.
You're right there. I mean, beep. Beep! Come on, beep!
There's a hint button that doesn't actually offer you any hints.
You can do it.
Even the game's store page is gently ribbing The Witness in its description. The Witness's About section states, quote, "You wake up alone on a strange island full of puzzles that will challenge and surprise you. You don't remember who you are, and you don't remember how you got here, but there's one thing you can do. Explore the island in hope of discovering clues, regaining your memory, and somehow finding your way home." The Witness is a single-player game in an open world with dozens of locations to explore and over 500 puzzles. This game respects you as an intelligent player, and it treats your time as precious. There's no filler. Each of those puzzles brings its own new idea into the mix. So, this is a game full of ideas, end quote. The Lookers, by contrast, reads, quote, "Explore several charmed locations on a mysterious island replete with over 55 creative puzzles. Over an approximately 2-hour playing duration, you will face unique challenges, ponderous ideas, and feebly amusing in-jokes. The Looker is a single-player game that respects you as an intelligent player, and it treats your time as, reasonably valuable. I mean, don't let me put you off solving the Riemann hypothesis or anything. As such, I will level with you here. Not every joke will be a hit, but there is no filler material. The puzzles are fun, and if you really think about it, aren't the real solutions the, friends we made along the way?" End quote. Now, I don't actually agree with much of what The Witness's store page has to say about itself. I think I made that pretty clear with my earlier comment in the section on gameplay, but I can't find fault with anything The Looker has to say about itself. The puzzles were indeed creative, challenging even. I actually got stuck once or twice. Not every joke landed, but a lot of them did. Like how one of the yellow boxes opens up to reveal a kid's menu with a maze on it, or the ending gag, which I won't spoil. It was even able to impress me. The game conditions you to think outside the box, but the first time I figured out you could draw on the wire between these two puzzles, it blew my mind. There's a great amount of variety in those 55 puzzles too. Like this one where you have to let the red drip down over the black lines to complete it, and the way the Looker integrates them into the environment was, on the whole, better than The Witness in my opinion. Just as the game isn't afraid to laugh at itself, it's not afraid to let loose with the mechanics either, and it was great fun. It does more with every aspect of itself in 2 hours or less than The Witness can in upwards of 12. When I got to the end of The Looker only to discover another live-action ending cinematic where the protagonist goes,
"Oh, jeez, dude, I was in a coma the whole time."
I pissed myself laughing. No, don't drink it! I completely understand why so many people who hated The Witness, like me, found The Looker to be such a cathartic joy. But this is a parody that could only have come from someone who loved the original. The Looker wears its love for The Witness on its sleeve, the same way Shaun of the Dead wears its love for George Romero's zombie movies on its sleeve. Oh hey, a trampoline! If The Looker had been made by someone like me, it would be a shallow and mean-spirited parody. It would not have this amount of creativity and thought put into its puzzles. It would not be interested in telling actually funny jokes. It would not have taken months to make. It would not be good. But it is, because it comes from a place of love. I think that's why it has a higher rating on Steam. I think that's why those who enjoyed The Witness, and those who really didn't, both really like The Looker. It's either an extra hit of fun puzzles with some self-aware in-jokes, or a cathartic roast of everything you think the original did wrong. It seems like the only person who didn't like like the looker was Jonathan Blow. He either hated it or refused to play it, or both. Sources differ and I can't find a definitive answer, but either way, it looks like he wasn't moved by the parody. He wasn't impressed with Joseph Anderson's review of The Witness either, not that he apparently watched much of it. By his own admission, he got a couple of minutes in and then shut it off, which is perfectly fine. It's never easy to receive criticism. But then he goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing here, that from what little he watched, Anderson clearly didn't understand what The Witness was trying to say, yet doesn't elaborate on why. And then he complains about how because so many people have seen Anderson's video, his interpretation is corrupting what Jonathan Blow considers truer readings of the text, that you shouldn't criticize something if you don't understand it. Irrespective of your thoughts on Joseph Anderson and his content, that is a poor bedrock on which to build a solid counter-argument. Given The Witness includes so many quotes from historical figures about different conflicting ways of looking at the world, his response is also very funny to me. There's a great irony to it. Anyway, before we continue, I just want to make it very clear that me bringing all of this up is not an invitation to go and pester Jonathan Blow or Joseph Anderson or Bradley Lavelle about these things. This stuff happened years ago and they're entitled to their own opinions on it, even if I disagree with some of them. I just wanted to talk about it briefly because I found it interesting and it helped inform my own thoughts on The Witness. Don't act like a dickhead. I said before that Joseph Anderson actually articulated a lot of my own thoughts about The Witness, and that's still largely true. But having now completed the game and gone back to watch the video, there is one point I absolutely disagree with. Throughout the video, Joseph Anderson posits The Witness is an elaborate joke at the player's expense, but that's not how it felt to me at all. The Witness is a deeply serious, aggressively self-conscious game, and that, ultimately, is what offended me about it. I can look past the hundreds of puzzles, I can get around the unnecessarily huge open world, but this is where I draw the line. To go on a brief tangent, just so we're all on the same page, there is a great distance between being self-conscious and self-aware. To be self-conscious, at least in this context, is to be defensive about yourself, to be hyper-aware of your own flaws and worried you might be criticized for them, to act and speak in a certain way to avoid others noticing these things about yourself. I was a lot like that while lost in the hormonal fog of puberty, and it was exhausting trying to be serious all the time, trying to be cool all the time, trying to impress all the time, just in case someone was watching. And it's not like I still don't feel that way sometimes these days too. We all have our ups and downs. It's just not all the time like it used to be. By contrast, to be self-aware, at least in this context, is to embrace who you are, to understand your flaws and eccentricities, to enjoy who you are in spite of them, to not care if you're criticized for being yourself, or if there is a serious problem in behavior, to take that criticism on board and work to be a better person. To sum it up with an example, say a friend tells a joke about you in good cheer that's still a deep cut. Someone who's deeply self-conscious might get embarrassed or upset. Someone who's a little more self-aware will laugh along with the joke. That's an oversimplification of the difference. I feel in real life most people would be a bit of both, but I hope that adequately explains what I'm getting at. The looker within this definition is very self-aware, and I think that's why so many people enjoyed it, but The Witness is the complete opposite. It doesn't seem that way early on, but the longer I played and the more I learned about the game's production and reception, the stronger the feeling became. The Witness might be an extremely non-linear game. It might set you loose on the island to tackle any run of puzzles in any order you want, but it will only allow you to do so on its own terms. I've already spoken about some of the ways it restricts the player, the lack of accessibility options, the lack of mobility options, even the way The Witness holds the player hostage in its opening moments to force you down that first hidden environmental puzzle. The Witness refuses to meet the player halfway on anything, and I don't think that's illustrated better anywhere in the game than in the theatre under the windmill. Disregarding the content of each of the 6 videos, you still have to watch all of them once before the game allows you to skip through them to find the puzzles hidden within. Not that you can skip through the 4th one, because the whole video is nothing but a 56-minute long environmental puzzle. Since we're talking about it, I can't imagine how long it took to find relevant video clips featuring circles to build puzzles off. That the James Burke one has 2 is insane. But anyway, my point is, if you want to 100% the game, you have to sit through each of these videos at least once, possibly more if you miss any puzzles, especially on the 4th one. The Witness cares more about making sure you watch them in full, uninterrupted, than it does does about respecting you as a player. The Witness is trying to say something that it thinks is incredibly important and incredibly deep, and it desperately wants you to get it, even if it has to hold you down and force feed it to you. That's why it doesn't let you move in the opening moments. That's why your reward at the end of the game is just the game again. That's why to complete the environmental puzzle in The Secret of Psalm 46, you have to watch the entire thing. That's why the environmental puzzles are actually tutorialized with this screen overlooking this river at the top of the mountain. That's why the Great Glass Elevator flies by so many of the game's optical illusions. That's why even more optical illusions are shown on screens in the secret ending. That's why the live-action cinematic feels so performative and unnatural. Jonathan Blow has commented that the game doesn't try to draw attention to this side of the Witness, and that he's content with the fact that some players will never see or understand it. But I disagree. The Witness wants you to see these things. It needs you to see these things. How else would you know how clever it is? How smart it is, how well read it is. How else will you understand what it's trying to say? The Witness can't abide the thought that players will miss this side of it, or engage with it in any other way than how the developers intended. This is a mature, serious game saying mature, serious things. Player enjoyment is not why we're here. So out go mobility options, out go accessibility options, out goes most of the story, out goes any explanation about what the lake does, out goes any trust that the player might discover these things on their own. Out goes everything that doesn't serve the message. The Witness is an extremely non-linear game. You can play it any way you like, as long as that's the right way. Having just gone on a bit of a rant, I want to stress I don't think Jonathan Blow is lying when he says the game doesn't draw attention to the environmental puzzles or optical illusions. I heard him say those things in the No-Clip documentary about the game on YouTube. It may be he just doesn't want to spoil the endings, it may be he genuinely believes it. But either way, I disagree. I certainly disagree with his comments on how he's content with some people not understanding the game. Everything I just spoke about in The Witness itself is evidence against that statement, as is his response outside of it to criticism, good-natured, constructive or otherwise. And there are other ways I find the game to be very self-conscious as well. In one video, either the No-Clip doc or the Giant Bomb Let's Play, I can't remember, sorry, Jonathan Blow talks about how he added every kind of line puzzle mechanic he could think of to preempt criticisms of, well, why didn't you include this kind of puzzle in the game? To me, that's very reminiscent of when something poorly written tries to excuse its flaws by drawing attention to the issue without actually doing anything about it. The Witness actually does something very similar with its audio logs. In one of the better hidden examples, a couple of the in-universe makers of the island discuss how there's not much else but quotes placed around the simulation. And maybe they should add in a couple of more personal recordings to give the place a bit more warmth. So there are a couple of more personal recordings to find, but only a couple. The vast majority of them are still just quotes. In another audio log, the in-universe makers of the island discuss how there aren't many atheist thinkers who they can quote from because very few of them have quotes that fit the message they're trying to convey through the simulation. They consider Carl Sagan, but decide he's too expensive to license. Sure enough, there aren't that many quotes from atheist thinkers in the game, and Carl Sagan is nowhere to be found. There's something almost autobiographical about these specific audio logs. Like, this is stuff the Witness's dev team actually talked about during the making of the game. But again, acknowledging the absence of these things does not absolve their absence. Jonathan Blow has said there used to be a lot more of this story about the in-universe makers of the island testing it out, but over the course of the Witness's 7-year development, most of it was cut, and I can hazard a guess why. It didn't serve the message. Neither did Carl Sagan, apparently. But these are things people might criticize about the game. Where's the story? Where's one of the most famous scientists and thinkers of the 20th century? So in go these knee-jerk reflex self-conscious defenses. What frustrates me most is the Witness would have been perfectly fine without any sort of reference to these things at all. Not every game needs a story, and not every creative decision in a work of fiction needs to be justified within the text itself. All these acknowledgements and all this railroading does is draw attention to how insecure the Witness is. How afraid it is to be taken as anything other than serious and deep. The game can't laugh at itself. It never even cracks a joke. The closest it gets to comedy in the entire thing is the fucking piss jar. And it's all in service to an idea that isn't even all that deep. The Witness is a game about understanding the world. It is a game about finding the material truth of the moment, free of preconceptions, free of biases. The game uses quotes and videos describing all these different perspectives and ways of thinking from people of different cultures, different faiths, different time periods, and different philosophies to express that. The game uses different line puzzle mechanics to reflect the way we might experience the moment, be it through light, or shadow, or sound, or shape, or colour. The game uses the optical illusions and hidden environmental puzzles to reveal how a material truth might be right in front of us if only we were looking at it from the correct angle. But that's it. By its own admission, The Witness is a game full of ideas, but none of them are its own. The Witness just presents all these things to you without saying anything about them, as though the inclusion of so many conflicting perspectives is enough to give it some kind of complex meaning, but it doesn't. Lacking any kind of comment or interpretation of its own, the game is essentially just parroting things other people have said in a very abstruse way, gesturing vaguely at famous names and famous quotes and big topics without actually adding anything more than really makes you think. And I'm not surprised. The Witness is too busy being insecure about the perspectives it left out to say anything interesting about the ones that actually made it in, and I really wish it had, because some of them are insane. Without any kind of contextual commentary, the game basically treats people like Richard Feynman and Albert Einstein as equal with fuckwits like Rupert Spira and Gangaji. You couldn't shell out for a clip of Carl Sagan, but you found money to give this shit a platform? And if you think The Witness just wants the player to come up with their own conclusions, I disagree. I don't think the game would try so hard to make sure you get the very important message it's trying to convey if it was content to let you find your own answers. My friend who loves the game said at least The Witness can act as a good introduction to these perspectives and topics, and I don't disagree with that, but it doesn't act like it's an introduction. There's an adolescent preachiness to it that assumes it has all the answers, and so you should listen to it without a word of criticism. It's presented in the style of an undergrad writing their first essay too. An assumption that if it uses big words and long sentences and flowery language, the whole thing will come off as more intelligent. It doesn't. All it does is make the game look pretentious. I want to make it clear there's nothing wrong with liking something that's pretentious. Like whatever you want. Snobbery is for twats. I myself love pretentious garbage. Give me something wanky that goes up its own arse and takes way too long to say something very simple that it mistakes for its own complexity for something profound. The Last of Us Part 2, Westworld, Interstellar, Cloud Atlas, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. I love that kind of shit, just as much as I love more straightforward stuff like Jurassic Park. But there is a limit to how much pretension I'm willing to put up with. If you're going to spend so much time just regurgitating what others have said, while adding literally nothing of your own to the conversation, and then try to pass that alone off as something deep and meaningful, at the expense of so much, I'm going to walk away offended. It happened with Black Mirror, it happened with Hannibal, and it happened here too. The Witness might treat you as intelligent, but it considers itself to be more so. It doesn't trust you to understand what it's trying to say, or even pay attention to it, so it forces you to listen. It doesn't trust you to respect its artistic vision, and so strips out any mechanics and options that might allow you to, in its opinion, play the wrong way. It certainly doesn't respect your time. The game only thinks it's treating your time as precious because it considers every second playing The Witness as time well spent. And if you have any criticisms about the way The Witness presents its themes and ideas, well, maybe you just didn't get it. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that The Witness is too busy looking at itself for me to find it entertaining or engaging. It comes off as either too insecure or too in love with itself, or both, to offer things like accessibility options, or to rein in its monstrous size, or to crack a joke at its own expense. It's so serious, and it so wants to be taken seriously, that I feel like it's missing the forest for the trees. Saying that there are many ways to understand the world, to find the material truth of any given moment, is not in itself profound, nor does wrapping everything up in such a complex tangle of mechanics and audio logs make the game's simple statement any more meaningful. Complexity for its own sake does not inherently add value. Case in point, no matter what angle you approach it from, no matter what extra mechanics it adds onto the puzzle, no matter how far you have to travel to get to it, it's still just a line drawn across a screen. I understand why people love it for that, but I can't. When I look back on my time with The Witness, I'm reminded of a line of dialogue from Season 2 of Westworld that articulates my thoughts even more succinctly than Joseph Anderson could 8 years ago. The context doesn't really matter, it's the message that's important. Quote, "You were right about one thing, it's awfully fucking pretty." End quote. Thanks for watching. And that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you want to help support the channel, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Share it around because YouTube sure as shit won't. And let me know what you think down in the comments. Also, why not check out some of my other videos? Anyway, the channel passed 5,000 subs while I was making this review, but I don't actually have anything special prepared right now, so that'll have to wait until next month. I'm going to have to break my moratorium on covering horror games, but fuck it, it's a special occasion. Anyway, for now, thank you so much for the support, thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, jeez, I was in a coma the whole time.